Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a profound scientific mystery, right at the absolute cutting edge of neuroscience and mental health. We are looking at exactly how psychedelics, like psilocybin, actually heal the brain. But, as we'll see, the answer isn't just about chemistry.
Which brings us to this really central question. What actually heals the brain on psychedelics? Because in modern clinical trials, the ones targeting depression, smoking cessation, and alcohol use disorder, researchers keep running into this totally fascinating paradox. The chemical dose that a patient receives actually predicts very little about their recovery. Seriously, you could have two people take the exact same dose of psilocybin, and they could have completely different therapeutic outcomes.
Okay, let's dive into this. Think of it this way. The psilocybin molecule itself is really just the key. It unlocks the door. But it's the profound, subjective, mystical experience of walking through that door that actually drives the healing. The molecule doesn't do the heavy lifting. The experience does the whole shebang.
Section 1. Measuring the ineffable. Operationalizing the mystical.
Now you might be wondering, how do researchers scientifically measure something as abstract and honestly beyond words as a spiritual awakening? Well, for decades, the qualities of a mystical experience were purely philosophical. But Roland Griffiths, a researcher at Johns Hopkins, took those subjective categories and turned them into the MEQ30. It's a 30-item validated clinical instrument that quantifies the depth and completeness of a patient's mystical experience. He literally turned poetry into rigorous predictive science.
The MEQ30 breaks this massive experience down into 6 specific subscales. We've got unity, which is that profound sense of merging with all things, noetic quality, or a sense of encountering ultimate truth, sacredness, a deeply felt positive mood, transcendence of time and space, and ineffability, meaning it literally defies description. Here's the catch, though. To have what researchers call a complete mystical experience, a patient has to score above 60% on all 6 of these subscales at the exact same time.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because this rigorous science certainly didn't appear overnight. Back in 1902, William James first defined these core mystical qualities. Fast forward to 1962, and we have Walter Pank's famous Good Friday experiment at Harvard, where seminary students were given psilocybin in a chapel. Then in 2006, Roland Griffiths publishes the gold standard replication of that study. And by 2022, we see Bogenschut publishing a rigorous trial on alcohol use disorder in the New England Journal of Medicine. It beautifully tracks a journey from early philosophy straight into modern peer-reviewed medicine.
Section 2. The mediation evidence. Hard numbers for a mystical state. This shifts us from the history of psychedelics to the undeniable statistical evidence proving that the mystical state isn't just some neat side effect, it is the main driver of the therapy. 67%. That is the striking number of participants in Griffith's 2006 high-dose psilocybin condition who scored a complete mystical experience on that MEQ questionnaire. And the magnitude of the positive changes in their mood and behavior months later, it correlated directly with how high they scored on that test. And look at this incredible number right here, 75%. In 1991, researcher Rick Doblin actually tracked down the original participants from that 1962 Good Friday experiment. 25 years later, 75% of the psilocybin group still rated that single morning as one of the top 5 spiritually significant experiences of their entire lives. The experience had not faded, it continued to guide them decades later. Absolutely wild.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happens when we apply modern math to the phenomenon. In the 2022 Bogenschut's trial for alcohol use disorder, researchers used statistical mediation analysis to test exactly what was causing the healing. They proved that a massive 83% of the therapeutic reduction in heavy drinking was directly caused by the mystical experience, not the molecule itself, but the profound experience it facilitated. The sheer scale of that mediation is just astounding.
It is absolutely crucial to understand this distinction. The mystical experience is not just a proxy for taking a high dose. It is a genuinely distinct variable with its own independent predictive power. In cancer anxiety trials, patients who achieved a complete mystical state at lower doses actually outperformed those on higher doses who fell short of the MEQ threshold. Dose alone doesn't guarantee the destination.
Section 3. Neuroscience of the mystical. Opening the black box.
So, what actually produces this mystical state in the physical brain? Let's walk through this fascinating domino effect. It starts with step 1, 5-HT2A agonism, where psilocin triggers a wave of cortical excitation.
Step 2 is the suppression of your default mode network, or DMN. That's the part of your brain that essentially constructs your narrative self. Step 3 is a global network reorganization. New connections start forming between brain regions that normally never talk to each other. And finally, step 4 is thalamic gating disruption, which basically floods the cortex with raw sensory signals that are normally filtered out.
The contrast between these two states reveals exactly how the healing happens. In your ordinary brain state, you have a rigid default mode network, a strong narrative self, and highly filtered sensory signals. But in the mystical brain state, the narrative self is completely suspended. Brain entropy increases, and you experience boundaryless consciousness. In this temporary void, where the ordinary software of selfhood is just paused, the brain dramatically reorganizes. And in that reorganization, profound healing can occur.
Section 4. Dissolving to heal. Liberation from the rigid self.
How does all this hard neuroscience connect back to human empathy? Why exactly does dissolving the ego bring such profound relief from psychological suffering? Well, think about it like this. Many of the mental health struggles psilocybin treats are actually disorders of an over-rigid self-model. Depression is characterized by a fixed negative self-narrative. Addiction is driven by compulsive self-referential craving loops. And deep anxiety is often rooted in the absolute terror of ego extinction. The mystical experience temporarily does exactly what these disorders fear most. It dissolves this self. But it reveals that dissolution to be liberation rather than annihilation.
So the crucial point is that not everyone automatically has this experience just by swallowing a pill. 3 factors determine a peak experience. Dose is necessary, sure, but it's not sufficient. Then there's set, the participant's intentions and psychological preparation. And finally, setting, the quality of therapeutic support and the environment around them. Careful preparation, things like meditation and spiritual practice, combined with a highly supportive setting, are absolutely essential to reliably cross that therapeutic threshold. We also have to acknowledge the limitations of the current science, though. Right now, roughly 30 to 40% of participants in controlled clinical trials do not cross the threshold for a complete mystical experience. And when they fall short of that MEQ threshold, their therapeutic outcomes are correspondingly diminished. Figuring out how to engineer this state reliably for everyone remains the single biggest hurdle for the next decade of psychedelic research. I want to leave you with this poignant historical quote from William James all the way back in 1902. The greatest revolution of our generation is the discovery that human beings, by changing the inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspects of their lives. He was describing the mystical experience 120 years before these clinical trials even existed. Mystics have known for millennia what functional MRIs and statistical mediation analyses are only just now proving. Which all leads us to this final thought. If dissolving the self is the key to escaping loops of depression and anxiety, what elements of your own over-rigid self might be standing in the way of your healing? It's a profound question about our own mental boundaries, isn't it? Thank you so much for diving into this explainer with me. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next one.